Hello and welcome to Dateline London. The Obama administration at odds with Israel over Iran, the Iraqi offensive against so-called Islamic State, and does it really matter whether we have general election leaders debates in Britain? My guests this week are Abdul Bari Atwan, who's an Arab writer and broadcaster, Jonathan Sacerdoti of I24 News, John Fisher-Burns of the New York Times, and Polly Toynbee of The Guardian. Very good to see you all. The people of Israel go to the polls later this month, and the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, was no doubt delighted to be invited to address the United States Congress. He used his big moment to make clear the differences with the Obama administration over Iran's nuclear program. Is this a serious breach, and is the only winner likely to be Iran? How do you see it, Jonathan?
In a way, I think what we've got to do is separate out all the discussion about whether or not he should have given the speech and whether that created some sort of theatre of politics in Washington, D.C., from the actual message of the speech, which clearly was very heartfelt on his part, and that is that we're getting dangerously close to doing a deal with Iran that could see it have nuclear weapons. And that's something that isn't just a danger for Israel, but it's also a danger for the whole region and indeed for the West. And we saw that the response to that, even in the run-up to it and after it, was that not only was Benjamin Netanyahu, as he said, speaking for the Jewish people, in some ways he was speaking for many Arab people. We've seen the editor of Al Arabiya in English coming out strongly saying that Obama should actually listen to what Netanyahu was saying about the Iranians, their state sponsorship of terror across the world, their pursuit of nuclear weapons capability. And we also saw just in the last week or two the IAEA saying that it was not able to get enough evidence that Iran wasn't actually pursuing nuclear weapons capability. With all of these bits of the jigsaw puzzle fitting together and the deadline for the actual P5+1 negotiations ending up perhaps in a deal, it's understandable that there was this split over what he was saying, but it's also very important to listen to the root message of the speech itself.
Horror, that the world is transfixed by the horror of ISIS. Are you really going to put all of that at risk because Netanyahu wants to be re-elected on a sort of far right-wing ticket? It's frivolous politics.
Frivolous politics.
Well, I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding of Israeli politics to characterise Netanyahu as far right. I mean, certainly he's more right of centre, certainly. But regardless of that, I think that a lot has been made over whether or not this will improve his chances in the upcoming elections on the 17th. Of course, Netanyahu is a seasoned politician. He won't be sorry if he gets a few extra votes for this.
Do you think he will? Or, I mean,
it's a mixed, there's been a mixed response in Israel over whether or not this helps or not. It's polarised things just as much there, as you say. So I think to call it an electioneering strategy alone is perhaps not to give him his dues, which is to say this is a man who is interested in taking political risks, and he does need US help. It's absolutely right. I think that Netanyahu sees the situation as quite dire. He doesn't feel he's getting the support he needs from the US, and this is really betting the farm on what he needs to happen. In a way, he was going to Washington, D.C. to remind the American people through the Congress that they need to remember what they're dealing with Iran. We can't really call Rouhani a moderate in true terms. This is a man who oversaw more executions in the first 6 months of his term than shortly before that.
Remember what we've just seen in terms of Netanyahu's absolute abuse of the evidence of what Iran had in the way of how far they were along the line towards nuclear weapons. He arrived at the UN with his splendid graphic that it turned out that Mossad, his own secret service, had said this is not true. They are not.
Well, no, there was a slight twisting of
and he did it before. He's always predicted.
He's
always predicted. Right back in 1999, he said they were on the verge of having the nuclear weapon. Turns out not to be true. And it does seem that the moderates in Iran are making a lot of headway. Is this really the point, to push them back into the far right of Iran by breaking off any negotiations?
I'm not sure that's the right reading of the region. I think the closer that you get to the Middle East, the more you feel the heat there. So I would say that the moderates in Iran making headway is perhaps a very strange way to describe what happened when we saw that the US could have supported the democratic revolution that was taking place, and instead it supported the quashing of those rebels. Instead, what we've seen is a government that looks more moderate to some, but really isn't. And we don't need to trust Netanyahu alone. We can look at the IAEA's evidence on Iran's nuclear intentions and see exactly what they have.
What is Netanyahu proposing as an option?
I think that what Netanyahu was pressing for, as far as I could see it, was not to weaken the sanctions just as they're starting to work, not to remove the ability to put sanctions in place so that the negotiations would have more bite.
But a final word on
that's something that can see diplomacy.
I want to move on to the other wider Iranian-Iraqi issue. Iraqi troops backed up by Iran are trying to push back the fighters who call themselves Islamic State. Meanwhile, in an act of profound vandalism in the cradle of civilization, Islamic State is destroying some of the great archaeological treasures found in Iraq. So can IS be defeated? Why do its destructive ideas have such traction in the world?
We've got to remember the nature of the enemy that's being dealt with here. You know, you mentioned the smashing up of ancient artifacts, and it's, in a way, it reminds us in some ways of the Nazis burning books. This is an extremist ideology that really is something that needs to be fought. And you said in your read into this that actually this was backed by Iran, but really it's led by Iran and Shia militias. And I think that that is part of the explanation for the popularity you mentioned of this ideology. I think that in a way ISIS is being able to paint itself as the last bastion of Sunni Islam, and people are being united against that by using foreign fighters who are actually a very small minority, around 3,400 out of 20,000 fighters, but by using them as PR for the West to get the West really riled about ISIS. ISIS is also trying to draw in the West and draw in America, much as Mike Duran in his seminal article in Foreign Policy about Al-Qaeda years back said Al-Qaeda was doing. By trying to get the West involved, it's a rallying call to other Muslims in the region to try to get them to feel persecuted by what they see as a crusade.
In 2010, the British general election was enlivened by a leaders' debate involving 3 parties. This time, as many as 7 or more parties may be involved, or maybe the whole idea will be scrapped, since the Prime Minister wants just one debate to be held before the campaign formally begins. Do we care?
I think it's clear we can agree that David Cameron would rather not do these debates, but I think I'm on his side on that one. Not necessarily because of any partisan support, but simply I think personally, the Strictly Come Danceification of politics is exactly what I think was wrong with those televised debates. I don't want to see politics dumbed down. I want to see the nation smartened up. And so I think that if we hold these elections, and as Cameron is saying, too close, if we hold the debates rather, too close to the election date, what we see is something swung by a sort of X-Factor style contest of popularity, how people look, whether Nick Clegg looks straight down the barrel of the camera, whether we remembered the names of the people in the audience. And frankly, I think most people in this country are smart enough not to think that those are the things that necessarily make you a good Prime Minister. Policy is far more important. And the glitz and the glamour of television, this is all very nice with the lights and everything, but if you think about how long we each get to speak on this show in a half hour with 4 of us, how long do you find that different politicians will get to speak when there's 7 of them in a debate?
I love your idea that we're going to have this serious debate instead. What we have is all the right-wing press, which is 85% of the press in this country, showing hideous pictures of Miliband every day.
Sorry, we've got the BBC on the left, so that's pretty huge.
Hideous pictures of David Miliband every day, of Ed Miliband, with sort of ludicrous abuse of him, of the coarsest kind. To allow somebody screen time equally to the 2 candidates to be Prime Minister seems to me to be fair.
Certainly, I don't think any of us will tire of seeing people like Natalie Bennett enjoy her opportunity to show her leadership capabilities. I think that certainly the strictlyfication of it all will be enhanced by the comedy of people who can't stand up for their own policies and have brain fades on air. And I don't think it's fair to say that as a nation we don't have a fair debate and we have a hugely right-wing press that's against everything. I think we see a very good debate in this country, in Parliament, in the media, all over. There are plenty of opportunities for us to see our politicians and our elected representatives debate all the time. We don't have to make a TV show out of it.
We wanted to show you the picture of the week. At least let's see if we can show it now, which is, as you can see, it's a woodpecker with a weasel on its back, which was taken by a photographer in Hornchurch, just outside of London. And we drew lots, and we decided that Jonathan was going to tell us what the caption should be for this picture.
Thanks for that. Well, we had a few. We had "I'll never fly Ryanair again." We had Cameron shaking the press off his back about the media campaigns. But I think there's no end to the lengths British-born jihadis will go to weasel out of travel bans.
That was very good. That was excellent. That's it for Dateline London for this week. We'll be back next week at the same time. If you have any comments on the programme, or actually any ideas for the title for The Woodpecker and the Weasel, you can put them on Twitter @Gavin Esler. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.